As my video title states, near perfect noir, or in this case more specifically neo-noir, is how I would classify the Netflix 2004 series Ripley. And I'm as likely as anyone to complain about Hollywood's penchant for just recycling old IPs and their risk-averse paranoia, but when it equals a masterpiece, well, then I guess I'm all for it. The Talented Mr. Ripley was a 1955 crime novel by Patricia Highsmith, and it has definitely endured. A classic of the genre that really differs from like the purely stereotypical mold. It started getting adapted to film as early as 1960 in a movie called Purple Noon, so the filmmakers saw the potential early on. Hey, here's an edition of the book you can have for just $1,500. Let's dispense with the story basics. We are in New York City, and we are introduced to a very petty con man who is just scraping by. His name is Tom Ripley. He gets by on low-level financial fraud, and based on his apartment, etc., it's just enough to keep him from being homeless or having to get a real job. Out of the blue, he gets hunted down by a private detective, but that private eye is there to make him an offer. His client wants to send somebody, anybody, who personally knows his son, one of his son's friends, over to Italy to try to convince his son to come home. His son is a grown-up trust fund baby who is basically just living off of daddy's money on the Italian coast in ultra-picturesque Trani and with his girlfriend that he met there. He's an aspiring painter, she's an aspiring writer, but what they really are just two obtusely bored dilettantes. He is Dickie Greenleaf, she is Marge Sherwood. And you see that shadow hanging over them? That is Tom Ripley's as he first finds Dickie in Italy, and it's a foreboding shot and a foreboding sign. Darkness is in fact about to intrude on their sunny lifestyle. That lifestyle includes Dickie's spectacular villa. Well, it turns out Tom really didn't know Dickie Greenleaf very well at all, but did know him. He just took the assignment because it was a free trip to Italy, all expenses paid, and a salary on top of that. The elder Greenleaf obviously has no shortage of funds, and Ripley can smell a greater jackpot than even what he's getting for such a little effort, and he's going to do everything he can to seize that jackpot. Back to the Netflix show, it is a straight-up adaptation of the source material. But the title, being just Ripley, is surely the result of a famous adaptation from 1999 already using the book's exact title, and you might be familiar with this movie. It certainly had three big names, Matt Damon, Jude Law, and Gwyneth Paltrow. And so we return to the concept of recycling. Do we really need a third adaptation of this source material? Well, if it's going to be this good, then the answer is yes, we do. And it's a very different project, too. This is about 8 hours worth of content, so very long form, streaming, having the advantage that it's not limited to basically some kind of, 2.5 hour maximum window. And you, without question, don't need any familiarity with either the book or the 1999 movie, much less the 1960 movie, to watch this. The main way people notice that this is different from the last version is not in the runtime, though. It's in the filmmaking style. This is shot in just absolutely stunning black and white. And while that obviously makes sense, given that the subject matter would be classified as noir, what matters far more than any fealty to the traditional genre standards is just how absolutely amazing this thing looks. It's one of the best looking films, TV or movie, that I've seen in an incredibly long time. I really, off the top of my head, don't even know what to compare it to. Really, when is the last time I saw a show or movie that was as well shot as this one? The cinematography and the directing in terms of, the actual shots is as good as it gets, I think. The locations are incredible, and while it might not be hard to make Old Italy look great, you'll be amazed at how great they make Old Italy look. The acting, meanwhile, is just about pitch perfect. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to see overly emotive acting. The acting, pretty much across the board, is very restrained, and that's part of the tension that the film builds and holds. And perfectly fitting with the genre, right? There's suspense, there's mystery here, and there's a lot of scheming, so I don't know what he knows. Does he know what I know? I think he might. How do I respond to this character, given that I think he might or might not know what I know, etc., etc.? All the characters are playing that game. There's so much tension drawn out of that poker dynamic. Is this character bluffing? Does the other character think that they're bluffing? Are they going to call? Etc., etc. And so while the acting is really fantastic, it's not that kind of Oscar Emmy quote-unquote moment style, or here's the part where I really get to let loose. The showy stuff that people who give out acting awards seem to like so much. Here's one character, Freddy, with the perfect facial expression for what we're talking about. There are whirlwinds going on inside of each character's head, while on the outside they're a sphinx dealing in riddles. This actor, by the way, Sting's kid, Elliot Summer. Now, the show is a slow burn, and it is not about fireworks, not even when things get violent. I would say there are, seriously, 2 minutes of action out of the roughly 8 hours of film. The filmmaker takes his time. By the way, the filmmaker, writer-director, is Steven Zaillian, who won an Oscar for Schindler's List. And he creates a story that has like a real-time feel. Things are happening at the pace that they do in real life, in your daily life. You know what movie this reminds me most of? And I'm definitely going to be the first person to make this observation. There's a 1941 version of The Tale of the 47 Ronin from Japan. It's a black and white, obviously, given the era, but black and white, 2-part movie, so it's like almost 4 hours, and it's about the most famous samurai tale of all time. Obviously a bloody one, and yet filmmaker Kenji Mizoguchi turned it into a slow-paced, exquisite, psychological film that's all about what's going on inside each character's head. It also has that slow, real-time feel. I've always wanted to make a video on that movie. I should. So anyway, getting back to Ripley. I mentioned it has very little action. I guess I'll go ahead and give away. There are 2 murders, and both of them are, unsettling in how realistic they look. And keep in mind that disturbing quality is rendered in black and white. You don't even see the red of the blood. There's a lot of crime in this show, but there's only a tiny little bit of violent crime. However, it hits hard when it does happen. We've talked about the main character, Tom Ripley, but let's talk about the actor real quick. So this is Andrew Scott. He really has to do a lot of heavy lifting in this movie because it's, I say movie, right? Film, whatever. Because again, 8 hours, almost no action, and so much of it is his face on camera trying to keep you in this story, trying to keep you invested in it. And then again, keep in mind the additional challenge, the actors in this thing are not overly demonstrative, like we talked about. So how in the world do you keep people engaged with your character? That is a really tall order, and I think he pulls it off. The Vanity Fair critic said his performance was charmless. I think that critic is witless. Scott was rightly nominated for his performance, and a lot of the critical praise the show got was about that. It's a masterclass in understated acting and portraying a sociopath who has to pretend he likes people and can relate to them even though he can't. And I really appreciate this about the performance, where I think it would have been easier to go for just the Two-Face type. Okay, perfectly natural, even though it's fake, in front of the marks, in front of the rubes, but then you see the real person, right? He turns the charm off, etc. But no, instead he is who he is. He can't seem to turn off his slightly awkward, creepy air, but he's tempering it as best he can when he's trying to fool people. There's a really interesting detail about that. He's actually an incredible mimic, but he can't seem to use that ability when he's conning people. And I want to close things out by circling back to the visuals, which they're these wonderful callbacks to the genre, like a scene like this, just classic noir. But there are also a lot of unexpected angles like this, shots that will surprise you and must have been difficult to pull off. Like, this thing, you would imagine it had some ultra extravagant budget. It's amazing how some shows like The Acolyte, the recent Star Wars show, can have a huge budget, $180 million for the same amount of episodes, and it just looks cheap. And then in something like this, everything just looks incredible. It feels anyway, I'm sure it's an illusion, but it feels like there were just no constraints whatsoever on what the director wanted to do. There are a lot of recurring visual motifs, too many to name, stairs being one of them, Italian art, specifically architecture, being another. And there's countless times the camera focuses on the face of an ancient sculpture, and it seems like they're a reflection of the characters, stone-faced on the outside, but so much going on behind that. They're kind of a strange form of commentary on what's going on in the story, too. That death is underlying so much of the story, or that a character is hiding something. It's just so well done. Speaking of art, there's a specific Caravaggio thread too. I definitely can't give away the device that involves him, but anyway. Water is another big one. And there's more, and the amazing thing is they all seem deliberate pieces of the puzzle, but that's what you get with top-notch filmmaking, which is what this is. But remember, I call this nearly perfect neo-noir, so no, I'm not giving a 5-star rating to every single facet. There is one thing I didn't like. There's only one thing out of this whole film that didn't work for me, and that was one scene towards the end. I did not find it believable that a character who gets duped manages to get duped in the way that he is. Real briefly, I'll mention that the 1950s world really comes alive here. If you love movies with, big landline phones, paper tickets, manually signing a guest book at a hotel, all those little touches, then you'll love that part of this movie. Ripley, possibly the best neo-noir I've ever seen. I'm gonna have to think about that. I just finished watching this. And so if you're a fan of the genre, at all, I highly recommend this, as long as you're okay with slow, exquisite filmmaking. In that sense, reminds me of Better Call Saul. You've got this anti-hero you're rooting for, but you feel like you shouldn't, but you can't help it. That very slow burn. Big difference here is you do not have a sympathetic anti-hero at all. But at least for me, even without that sympathy, my heart was jumping into my throat every time he is about to get caught. And anyway, there it is, my review/teaser/recommendation. Thanks.